Yes, live now.
Thank you. Right, hello, welcome everyone to another one of our Connecting Leeds webinars. I'm just going to briefly, before we start, go through a few housekeeping rules and then I'll introduce the panel that we've got today. So please like people to use, first of all, this is being recorded, so obviously if you have concerns about that, then you need to leave the session, but obviously the panelists are all okay with that because we're here. We would really encourage you to use the Q&A function to ask questions. We're going to do a few presentations and then we'll have that debate. If you put them in there, it's really useful. You can look at the questions that other people have asked, and if you think that's actually I want that answered, give it a thumbs up, and then they naturally rise to the top of the question list so that we can prioritize them when I'm asking the panel. So that's really a useful point. We do retain the right to remove participants during the session if there are offensive or discriminatory content that you are posting. So if we can please refrain from that behavior, I'm sure you all will. Thank you. And if there's any more queries, if you contact our team at the email address below. Okay. Okay, so without further ado, I'll introduce you to our panelists we have today. We have Councillor Helen Hayden, who is our exec member for Climate Change, Transport and Sustainable Development. We have Gary Bartlett, who's our Chief Officer for Highways and Transportation. And we have Martin Hamilton, who is Director at Leeds Civic Trust. And I'm Paul Foster. I'm Transport Strategy Manager here at the Council, and I'm going to be sort of chairing the session, putting the questions to the panelists as well. Okay, so this is webinar number 8 of the series. We've done a number of these already, and I hope you can look back at some of those on YouTube that are available via the website as well. I hope you find them interesting or have previously joined them. So really enjoyed doing these. I think it's been a great way to get experts' views and show what we're doing and allow you to ask questions around the strategy and what we want to deliver in the city. So I'll just do a quick introduction of the strategy and then we'll get into the other presentations. So the vision for the strategy is for a city where you don't need a car, and that's making sure that everyone has a healthy, affordable, low carbon alternative for every journey that they do in the city. And I really stress that everybody and everyone, we want to think about this strategy, and we've tried to think about every journey that you may make, whether that's to for recreation, to visit friends, for healthcare appointments, for employment, for education. They're the reasons that people travel, and we want to make sure that everyone's got those alternatives to do those things. We've clearly got to do this for 3 very good reasons, we believe. One is tackling climate change. Transport is 1/3 of all the emissions in the city, carbon emissions in the city, so we've clearly got to work hard to develop that. There's a whole webinar on decarbonising transport that was a really good debate on that. Delivering inclusive growth. This is about making sure, as I said, that everyone has access to those education, healthcare, employment opportunities across the city. And that they're not disadvantaged in being able to get to those. And by making ourselves have a much more efficient transport system, we can reduce the cost of travel for individuals, and that's at the heart of the strategy as well. Speaking of hearts, we need to also make ours healthier, and I think the point around health and well-being is well made and needed. The walking and cycling have huge benefits for both our mental and physical health, and we've also got to, within the strategy, look at how we can reduce the impact of transport on our health, whether that's air pollution or road danger. So we've set ourselves some very ambitious targets within the strategy to change behaviours, to reduce car use by 30%, increase walking, cycling, rail and bus, and deliver mass transit as well, and really shift some of those journeys to those to make us more efficient. To, as I've said, eliminate the road danger and with Vision Zero, where we want 0 people killed or seriously injured on Leeds roads by 2040. The climate emergency, clearly the council declared that, and we've got ourselves a target of being carbon neutral by 2030, and there's a lot more in that later on. Okay, Finn. The strategy comprises these 6 big moves, and I'm not going to go into those now for the sake of time, but I think if you do read the strategy, look at the detail within them. We've got lots of things proposed in each of those areas that starts to give us a much better transport system across the city. Okay, Finn. Right, so first of all, I'd like to welcome Councillor Helen Hayden, who's going to give us an overview of a relatively new post that she's taken on and how she's going to bring this forward for Leeds.
Thank you, Paul. And I'm delighted to be here. It is a new challenge for me, and it is relatively new. I came at the end of February into post, following on from the brilliant Councillor Lisa Mulheron. And it's really, really interesting and really fascinating, and I'm becoming very passionate about this strategy because I want Leeds to be a city where you don't need a car. I don't have a car myself, and because I just got fed up of not being able to afford the car that I wanted in terms of low carbon. And when my second car in 9 months was written off, I said, that's it. That was 2 years ago, and I now kind of like share a car, or share a car with other people. So if I need to, and that's part of this vision where you don't need a car. Kind of, you could hire one with car clubs, and I know that they're kind of popping up around. My other, in terms of, I'm very passionate about this in terms of climate change as well, but also in terms of the health benefits. And in my previous role as chair of the Adults and Health Scrutiny Chair, I was, our main aim in Leeds is to improve the health of the poorest the fastest. And this has to be a holistic approach. It can't just be adult social care and health approach. As we know, housing affects health, but where people live and the environment they live in, especially in terms of air quality and the air that they breathe, but also more immediate often is actually being maimed or indeed killed on our roads. And at the webinar this morning with Rachel, led by Rachel Elred of Westminster University, she actually kind of put into statistics, or what I kind of already knew to be true, just from working in as a teacher in an inner city school, watching our children from deprived areas having to negotiate the biggest A roads, dual carriageways to get to school, to get home, trundling past where they lived and where they went to school and where their parents went to work. So, and Rachel Elred was saying this morning that the groups least likely to use motor vehicles are the most likely to be harmed by them. And that's a really interesting thought, that, isn't it? And it's quite shocking that those who do not have cars are most likely to be harmed by them. So she gave the statistics that disabled people use cars a third less than non-disabled people, yet are five times more likely to be harmed by them as pedestrians, etc. So in terms of connecting people, being able to get to the hospital, being able to get to work, being able to get to school, in a way that doesn't use a car. And I know as a parent of children who go to a primary school, and I know as a counsellor in an area with quite a few primary schools, parents often find it very difficult to make that decision if they're having to go to work afterwards. It's changed in the last year through the pandemic, but it's very difficult. If you need to get to work, to get the children to school and then to get to work is very, very difficult and very challenging. You've got to use a car. And I'm very passionate about making Leeds that safe environment where people can choose happily to walk, cycle, or use public transport and to go about their daily lives. So very much feel proud that I've been able to step into this position where I can lead that forward. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Councillor Hayden. I'm sure we'll have some more questions. And I think we all experience the city, and live here, work here, and our personal experiences and how we actually deal with that and change that is really important to all of us as well. So I'm now going to introduce Gary Bartlett, who's going to take us through some of the things we've heard so far in the consultation that we've been doing.
Thanks, Paul. I think we've got some statistics on the responses to date. So in terms of overall feedback towards the consultation, we've had 12,671 visitors. I think that's to our Commonplace site, with over 3,309 contributions. And these webinars, interestingly, has been viewed over 1,600 times, which is really positive. So we've had a good response to the webinars themselves, but it's good to see that people have then taken the time afterwards to actually view what's being said on YouTube. So we'd encourage that more and more. And what's pleasing to date is that 70% of respondents to the consultation agree or strongly agree with the vision and the objectives of the strategy that Paul has briefly described today, and Councillor Hayden has given that strategic vision for as well. So that's really encouraging. 21% of respondents, though, for balance, disagree or strongly disagree with its contents. And a quick analysis, there'll be more as towards the end of the consultation period when we analyse the results. There are some that are saying that the strategy is not ambitious enough. Some will say and are saying that the strategy is anti-car. So that's interesting feedback. We believe the strategy is balanced. We believe it is not anti-car. If people need to go about their business, then they will still be out by car. They will still be able to do that. But the strategy is about giving real choice to everyone in terms of how they move about the city. So we will still analyse the results, though, and continue to develop our proposals. And then it's always difficult, isn't it? There are people that say it's not ambitious enough, and then some people say that it is ambitious. That's another bit of the feedback, that it is in the right direction. And 58% of the respondents are saying that they're quite or very likely to change to a lower carbon transport mode, with 20% of respondents quite or very unlikely to change to a lower carbon mode as well. So it sort of conflicting results depending on your viewpoint, but nevertheless very interesting. And the 70% positive result is encouraging at this stage. Some of the top 3 responses in terms of what would encourage you to travel differently. Concern for the environment, very important. Dedicated cycle routes, people want to see more safer cycle routes throughout the city. We've done a lot of work in that area in recent years, but clearly there's more to do. And also to make our streets safer. And again, there's a lot of work going on there, and Paul's touched on our Vision Zero approach that we're adopting as well, with many other authorities across the country, and obviously the police too. Another aspect of the feedback is, if you decided to use a different mode of transport, what mode would you use? And out on top, we've got bus, bike and train. Millions of people use the bus each year in West Yorkshire and in Leeds. Clearly there's been a major issue in recent times, but we do expect that to return, and it remains with the train a form of mass transit that is going to be really important still in Leeds and in West Yorkshire for many years to come. Some of the feedback we've got in terms of answering the question, what can we do to help you to make changes to the way you travel? Reasonably priced public transport is in there, and again, Paul touched on that at the beginning. This is coming out loud and clear from the feedback, that some journeys are just far too expensive, and what can you do about that? Better integration of bus and rail. Clearly we need smooth, easy integration between the two, indeed all modes across the city. But that's useful feedback we're receiving, and we've known for a long time now to deliver a mass transit network, and I think by that people do mean something along the lines of a tram light rail system, Well, obviously, we do have mass transit systems at the moment in terms of bus and train, but that comment is about the, if you like, the higher quality, the high end trams and light rail systems. So again, useful feedback for us to build on. And I think for me, having done a couple of these now and listening to feedback to lots of consultations over the years, what strikes me most of all now is that I believe this is an ambitious plan. But what's really striking and really clear is that Highways and Transportation in Leeds City Council and Leeds City Council alone can't deliver these ambitious plans on their own. What we do need are champions across the whole city, all sectors, all walks of life to help us hit our targets and meet our ambitions. And what's really encouraging is that some of the things that people have said to us that they will try and do to help meet these ambitions. You know, encourage my employer to review the current site of our office space and move closer to key locations. As a key point in terms of planning. Only do 12 journeys a year by car, do all rest by bike, train or foot. Reduce online deliveries and collect from a central point. Buy a bike and ask myself, is the journey necessary? So all these things are bits of feedback that we're getting, and it's about all of us trying to think about what we do on a daily basis and can we perhaps do it differently? And that's what it needs. It can't just be certain people in a certain room in Merrion House on the 8th floor, for example, just leading on this. It needs to be a whole city approach if we're going to really tackle some of the issues that are here. So what does this mean for Leeds? As I say, we do need to think about all journeys that are made in the district, not just commuting trips. This is really a key point, and I know Paul can wax lyrical about the statistics relating to commuter journeys and trips across the city, as opposed to sort of shopping trips that exist, which far outweigh actually commuting trips, and we've got clear statistics on that. Obviously, the other important element here is the scale of the climate emergency challenge means that we all need to play a part to meet this target. And I think that's come out strongly in some of the other webinars that have been held in this session. And clearly linked to all this, there are some significant challenges in all this, not least funding availability. Leeds City Council and Highways and Transportation have been lucky in recent years. We have attracted significant funding, but more funding is needed if we are to meet the ambition that's within the plan. And clearly, everyone in the city and the country and wider than that, the last 12 months have been absolutely dreadful with COVID-19 pandemic, and we need to understand, we're all struggling to understand what the long-term impacts of COVID will be on our travel behaviours, and how long it will take for things to return to any sort of normal. So no one's sure at this stage. There is an expectation that it will return to some degree, but we shall wait and watch and learn as things progress over the next few months. So some key issues and challenges in there for Leeds.
Okay, thank you very much,
at
Gary.
That point, yep.
Yeah, thank you very much, Gary. Yeah, I think, you know, as the consultation continues and following the end of the consultation on the 11th of April is the time you've still got to respond to that, and encourage everyone that you know to respond to it, please. We will obviously be analysing that and presenting the results in a lot more detail, but it's interesting to see what's there so far. So I'm now going to hand over to Martin Hamilton from Leeds Civic Trust, who's going to give us that sort of external perspective from the Trust's point of view of what they believe we should be doing in transport in Leeds.
Thanks, Paul. Yes, so if you could put the next slide up, please. So 3 or 4 years ago, the Trust decided that we wanted to sort of solidify what our views were on transport. There was an increasing interest within our organisation in transport issues, and this was at the time when the council was commencing the transport conversation. We felt, you know, if we were to respond to that, we really needed to get our own house in order in terms of what we felt were the key issues facing the city in the area of transport. So we developed this transport vision and a number of documents within it that focused on particular issues. If you could put the next slide up, please. And the transport vision that we came up with looks at these 6 key areas. So the idea of the freedom to go, this is the idea that, you know, the principle of being able to travel where you want, when you want, should be the starting point for any transport policy. We think that transport should be liberating, it should be life enhancing, and you know, the freedom to move around the city is absolutely fundamental. However, that needs to be tempered, obviously, by environmental issues. It's not about the freedom to use a particular mode of transport. It's about being able to get around the city without worrying too much about when you can do it and where you can do it from. So ensuring that everyone has access to different modes of transport is really important. We believe that the transport system should be sustainable. So it should use space efficiently. It should use our road space efficiently. It should use energy efficiently. It should be a system that is easy to renew and replace with the minimum use of energy. That's an important component, we feel. And then improving health and well-being, again, a really important factor here. So clearly there are some modes of transport, such as car use, which are actually, you know, frankly, deadly. You know, people get run over, cars pollute the environment. They're not in of themselves particularly promoting health and well-being. Whereas if you cycle, if you walk, not only is it a good mode of transport in itself, but it actually makes you fitter and healthier. So a key sort of strand of our policy document is about how you promote health and well-being. The fifth area that we focus on was planning and transport together, as we called it. So this is the idea that you can't consider transport without considering how you plan the city. So this is the whole idea about where we develop new settlements in the city. Are they car reliant? Can we make things denser? Can we increase density in city centres and town centres? Can we relocate our employment in those areas to minimise travel? So thinking about planning and transport as holistically rather than as separate things, we feel are really important. And then the final thing we called the right tool for the right job. So this is really recognising that different modes of transport have different functions and different uses. Clearly, you know, you can't use a bicycle to carry massive loads. Someone I noticed in the Q&A mentioned about care workers and how practical it is for them to use public transport. There are certain journeys that are complex where a car might be the only way to do it, but it's about identifying what the right mode of transport is for the right job. And clearly buses, trains are able to transport lots of people in a very efficient way, in an environmentally friendly way. So really trying to think about the right tool for the right job, we feel is really important. So these things taken as a whole, we feel are actually quite well reflected in the draft transport strategy that the council has produced. It's expressed in different ways perhaps, but a lot of these elements are included in that. But really the key for us now is, what do we do with those principles? What do we do with these fine words in terms of actually delivering on the ground and making some really fundamental changes? Next slide, please. And for us, what's changed since we looked at our transport vision is this target of net zero carbon by 2030, and the role that the changes in the way that transport functions in the city can contribute towards that target. The council's draft strategy recognises that the actions proposed in there will only take the city so far. There's still a gap in actually meeting that 2030 target. So our view is that we really need to be quite radical and quite rapid in implementing the actions on the ground that are suggested in the strategy to bridge that gap. Next slide, please. So here are some of the things that we feel are important to consider. I think, you know, it's important to reflect on the fact that this draft strategy takes us up to 2030. But, you know, if we consider that there's now a consultation process, no doubt the feedback will be considered. there will be a document produced later in the year. And then actually starting to implement some of these things on the ground does take time. If we think about the trolley bus that was cancelled in 2016, I think it was, the money that was released as a result is still, we are seeing action on the ground, but it does take a few years before things actually happen. So, you're probably only looking at 8 full years, if you like, of time to actually start to implement some of these strategy areas. So we think the council needs to be ambitious and almost over-plan, over-program to ensure that enough is done to actually deliver the strategy. So having more schemes up your sleeve than you could implement in the 8-year period, so that enough get implemented to actually deliver. Another area that we feel is incredibly important are the proposals around charging regimes, work-based parking levy, which I think Paul is going to touch on in a moment, and other opportunities to raise revenue and to encourage changes in transport behaviour. These are suggested in the strategy as something that might have to be done. We feel that they must be done because we think these are the sorts of things that will bridge that zero carbon gap. So we would suggest bringing those in as soon as is practically possible. And in the same way, bringing the bus service under public control. This is obviously an issue for the combined authority, but we feel that this is something that could have a step change. I noticed the feedback so far suggests that if people chose another form of transport, it would be buses. So we need to make our buses attractive as possible. And we feel that one way of doing that is to have a much more close relationship with local council and the combined authority. So we would be pushing for that. And then clear targets on reallocating road space. So actually being very clear that if this is to work, if we're going to create more space for cyclists, more space for pedestrians, more space for buses, we need to think about what that means practically in terms of how we're reallocating road space, reducing the amount of space that is used purely for cars. And then, as I mentioned previously, in relation to our transport vision, planning and transport together, we think this is a really important thing. So really bringing the planning and transport spheres together as a single entity, thinking about 15-minute neighbourhoods, trying to discourage developments in the outlying areas of the city where car use is required, thinking about where our workplaces should and need to be, and thinking about the role of the city centre actually post-COVID. People will go back to the city centre, people will go back to working in our offices, but maybe the standard commute will no longer be there. So thinking not just about the standard journeys between the outlying districts of Leeds and the city centre, but also about other journeys and how we can make those more attractive, journeys that take less time, journeys that take up less energy, journeys that don't require people to necessarily go into the city centre once a day and go out once a day. So in summary, we welcome this strategy, we welcome the direction of travel that the strategy has, but we do think that in some areas we really need to move quickly if we're to bridge this zero carbon gap. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Martin. And I think a number of the points you raised there do echo the views we're getting back from the general public again that Gary said. So I'm just going to touch on some of those elements quickly around how ambitious we need to be and the challenge of net zero by 2030. I think one of the things we've reflected on is that sometimes it depends what you're doing, doesn't it? But in our day-to-day lives, 2030 seems a long way away, and having a target that you measure against a long distance future means that you can put off that change a little bit. And so I think one of the things we've definitely learned is that maybe we need to have an annual target. We need to be saying, well, actually, to get to that, we're going to have to reduce by 10% a year. So what are we going to do to get that figure and monitor continued progress and make sure that we are moving in the right direction at the right speed, because it's going to be harder to do it, to steepen that curve. The longer before we take action, the more radical and faster the action has to be. So I think that's one important point to make. The next point really is around that, that both yourself, Martin, and others have said about people want us to do more. So I think what we want to look at is what can we do that encourages change of behaviour, but also the point that Gary made earlier around needing the funding to deliver some of this. So what are the mechanisms that Martin's just pointed out that we can get some revenue to prioritize those things that people want us to do? And I would say that's buses from a lot of the consultation we've got. That's really important to the people of Leeds. That's the feedback we're getting. So how can we make them cheaper, more reliable, and just generally much better systems, serve people better? So we've looked at, as Martin says, a couple of the suggestions in the strategy were around workplace parking levy, and I just wanted to give some examples to people. And we haven't really discussed this in many of the other webinars, so we're just going to do that here. Nottingham, the example of Nottingham is often cited, and what Nottingham's workplace parking levy has achieved is they actually got a 15% reduction in the number of parking spaces in the city centre because of this. Employers decided they didn't need them. They reduced the number they had by 15%, and it also gives them about £8 to £10 million a year of income from the charges that they have for that, which does two things. One, it helps them run the services and things that they do, but also it showed central government that they were committed to delivering on transport. And then at that time, the commitment therefore from government to bring in much more than that to deliver the tram system came about. So there's something around showing that the city could do as much as it could to raise its own funding, but also that attracted greater funding from government as well. So that, I think that's the benefits of a scheme such as that. Clearly Leeds has about, sorry Finn, I'm still back on that. Leeds has about 20 to 25,000 parking spaces in the city centre, and if we charged a fee equivalent to the sort of public car park rate that you would pay if you didn't have that free space in the city, it would generate a significant amount of income. And the other point to make is Leeds city centre probably does have the alternatives. So there's bus, there's rail, there's park and ride, and in the future there's going to be, we all hope there's going to be a tram system, mass transit system as well to make it easy to get into that system. So where we can give people an alternative, maybe these sorts of behaviour change charges are something that we could accept and take forward. Okay, Finn. I think the other one that we've talked about as well is a suggestion is a low carbon zone, which is a similar principle to the clean air zone. And what we've seen from that was, even with the proposal a few years into the future, that we offered support and we worked with the businesses, with the bus operators, with the taxi trade to change their vehicles in advance of that. And we've been so successful in that we've reached, we've shown that we would reach that those legal limits with that. So could you do a similar principle with based on carbon emission rather than particulate matter? And there's nuances, but generally you can get both changes in the same way. So we target the most polluting vehicles, and it can be very effective. You see things like the carrier bag charge. Even a small fee has made people change behaviour, and is that something we should be looking at bringing forward? With both those measures, though, we have to consider the sort of the economic elements of that and the concerns and timing of that as we recover from COVID. But I think one thing that we do need to remember is that the most economically successful cities have great public transport services, and so actually delivering economic growth, delivering those jobs and that employment for people is easier done if you have a great public transport system. So we should always bear that in mind when we're considering measures like this, if it helps us deliver those. The other issue is very much around equality, and I think a lot of this we've got to ensure that and as Councillor Hayden sort of outlined, the cost of electric vehicles, a lot of people would probably like to do that conversion, but at the moment, the numbers available, the second-hand market for those is not there. So we would have to make sure that we do get to the position where this is a fair alternative available for people. Would we need to have exclusions to the scheme? Would we need to help with support people to convert to lower carbon forms of transport as part of this? And especially those people whose vehicle is an essential part of their business, tradespeople, you know, the examples of sort of social workers and people who visit people and have to get around the city all the time. So we really need to consider those elements if we were going to bring something like this forward, and we're very conscious of that. So I think we just wanted to cover those in a webinar because we hadn't previously, but I think there's some great questions in the chat I've seen so far, and I would like people to add some more, and we'll see if we can get through them. We're not going to get through them all in the time available. We will we have got a frequently asked questions on the website, so any of these that we don't answer, we'll try and incorporate them into there as well, so hopefully there's some feedback to people on the sorts of questions that we're asking. Finn's reminding me, we just need to remind you the consultation closes on the 11th of April. We'll be doing the analysis of the feedback and develop up a final strategy alongside an action plan to show what we're going to do in detail in the next 2 or 3 years, and then hopefully that'll come to executive board sometime in the summer to be approved, and then we can continue with the delivery. I mean, we're already doing lots of schemes, but then this really would focus the change in how the schemes we promote and what we deliver going forward. Okay, thanks, Finn. Should we take the slides down? Okay, so there's a number of questions already, and I think one that Martin, you briefly brought up, but I think that link between planning and transport is key, isn't it? And we need to support and supplement, obviously there's the existing areas, but how can we utilize planning to help solve our problems? And I know, Councillor Hayden, this is again part of your portfolio, and I wondered if you had a view on how we can make sure that the sort of transport and planning do work very closely together to help deliver this.
Well, it's really useful that I am the one exec member for both departments, because what we need to get away from is working in silos. So having one overall director, one executive member, it's up to us to ensure that this transport strategy is not just for the transport network, it's for WICA or for anybody interested in cycling or any of the kind of interest group. It's for everybody in the city and for people who are involved in building developments and living in those developments and planning those developments. And I think there's a real opportunity here to bring all those things together and make sure that we are working together, and that it's just about people talking together and making sure that we ensure that happens. So I think we're in a good place to do that. We just and with planning, everything has to go into it. Health, education, where people, if we are serious about having 15-minute neighbourhoods, where do people go for their shopping? Where do they, can they walk there? Thinking that this and making sure that planners are considering all those aspects of how people live their lives as holistically as possible.
Yeah, and I know from work we're doing with planning colleagues that that thinking is already starting, and how we can join up the planning policies with the transport policy. So and as you say, it's good to have that leadership on at that level. Gary, if I come to you on a question that we have had a number of times, really, and I think there's sort of two aspects to this. There's one is around concern from, should we call the outer areas of the city, that maybe we're not always including them within the strategy. And I think part of that comes from, what are the details? What are you actually going to do on the ground? And how are we going to make sure we show people that, there are examples of what we've done, and how is that going to be developed?
Yeah, thanks, Paul. It's a good question. And for me, it's the principles of what we're setting out in the strategy they're not just for the city centre, they're applicable across the board to all areas. And if you take things like the Vision Zero, that's something that we do need to apply across the city and indeed the region and indeed the country, because it's such a massive issue is road safety. So I think what we're doing here is we're setting those principles out that are applicable to all areas. And what you touched on just a few minutes ago was about, we've got the strategy here emerging, but we need the delivery plan the action plan to follow on, and that's where we do need to then identify the specific interventions in those areas, and there is a lot of work going on in some places. Yes, there's much more that's needed to be done. We wouldn't hide away from that, but there has to be a degree of realism as well, because I've heard it, seen it before, some questions about when will a mass transit system be introduced, if I dare say, in Wetherby, for example. But you do need to take government with you in terms of funding. They will need to know what the demand forecasts for such things are. So there does need to be a degree of realism here. But what I'm hoping that will come out here is the principles will be applicable across the whole city. And it's then up to, hopefully, as I indicated in my session, that people will start to own it and see how they can interpret it for their areas and become champions for it. And we see it at a very local level outside schools, where parents, head teachers really champion safer routes to school outside schools, and it's really effective in terms of getting people out of cars, and we need more of that. So I use that as a very local example, but I think I hope it helps to illustrate the point I'm trying to make.
That's very good, thank you, Gary. I think Mike Sell's question, I think, is brilliant. I think there's a nub of what the issue we have, and maybe touches on that point you make there, Gary, about where are we going to get mass transit. But does everyone need a tram? Can we use the bus? How do we make the bus more attractive? So Martin, maybe you could, the trusts are very clear on that as well, and I think it'd be, I think you can probably all give us your views on how we do this, because it is something we have to tackle.
Well, I mean, we think this is so important that we've actually just recently employed someone, and a major part of this person's work is going to be to run a project looking at how do we get an excellent bus service in Leeds, not in West Yorkshire, in Leeds, and what do we need to do for Leeds. And that's not about bean counting. It's not about looking at how many people catch a particular bus. It's actually asking people, what would make you more inclined to use a bus, or why won't you use a bus at the moment? So we're going to have a project where we will ask those questions. We'll have a public survey. We'll have information gathering in different ways, and we hope that will feed into the thinking around buses, because I think we're clear that the bus is the major public transport. Is a major form of public transport in the next 10-20 years. Even with mass transit, the buses are still a major part of the mix. And I think I'm right in saying that places that have trams, buses are still very often the major form of transport. So it's not an either or. The mass transit is not the icing on the cake, but it's something that is nice to have, and may well be something that we should have in Leeds. But in the meantime, we've got to really get people on buses, because bus use has declined in the last few years in the city, along with other cities. We've probably done slightly worse actually than other places, other comparable cities. So I think a major challenge for the city over the next 8 years, let's say over the next 8-9 years in the lifetime of the strategy, is how we get more people using those buses. Part of the solution is we feel is the public, how these buses are controlled in terms of public not public ownership, but certainly a public overview through franchising or whatever it might be.
Thank you, Martin.
Paul, if I can come in there, I think we've done some work on park and ride in the city, haven't we, in recent years? And I do remember when I joined Leeds, people saying and actually being advised that park and ride wouldn't work in Leeds. Don't try it. But we eventually did put it in place in Ellen Road, and by providing a cheap, high quality, frequent service, we did prove that these things can work. I think it was Paul on the chat talked about what are we going to do in the aftermath of the pandemic, because people don't want to use public transport, and that's a really good question, because there is anxiety about using public transport, and we've raised that with DFT about the messaging over the next few months as we come out of this nightmare, that there needs to be very clear messaging about all the good work that the train operators and the bus operators have done about keeping their vehicles clean, etc., etc., and getting that out so people do feel safe again to use public transport. But as you say, and as Martin says, mass transit will have a part to play. It won't be the be all and end all. For us, it's about maximising choice across all the modes, but where we have proven that if you provide a frequent, high quality bus service, people will use it, certainly on the park and rides.
Another good example of that is the 36 service that's been really successful in growing patronage through a high quality service, and it has got people, a huge number of the people who use that bus do have a car at home. It's not their only choice. They are deciding that the bus is the best way for them to travel. So I think it can be done, and we need to work hard on that. I agree. Do you have any views on that, Councillor Hayden?
Sorry, I'm making sure I mute myself when I'm not speaking. Yes, people don't use the bus because they don't turn up when they want, when you need them or when you expect them. There's difference in fares and you can't buy one ticket. I mean, all these things are put people off using the bus. I've with my two children after a late meeting, standing on and we decided to walk home, which, we didn't particularly want to, although we like walking because of the time of night and things like that. The bus just didn't turn up. So we need it to be frequent, we need it to be safe, we need it to be, like I mentioned, saw in the chat, a flat fare like they have in London. Or at least, you have one way of paying and you don't have to think about, oh, I've got this ticket, but I can't get on that bus, although it is going quite near where I live. So we need to do all that before we try and encourage people to go on the bus, because these are the reasons why people aren't using the bus.
Very good, thank you. I think maybe touching on that, and there's a question in the chat, isn't there, about walking and cycling and people feeling safe to do that, and it's not just safe from own danger. It's it's the elderly, women alone out on the streets. How do we tackle that, and who do we bring into working with our partners to ensure that's more available to people? I'm sure Councillor Hayden, you'll have experienced some of that from work you've previously done as well. Absolutely,
and with what we're seeing about particularly women and reclaiming the streets and things like that, it is something. When you walk, I've got addicted to walking during the last year on lockdown, because it's one thing you can do. But when you're even during the day, if you're quite in a lonely part, you are nervous as a woman on your own, kind of what might happen. You've got your phone in your hand, and we wouldn't want that to be in our streets. But there is all kinds of ways that you can design out crime. And actually, an excellent webinar this morning about actual in the low traffic neighbourhoods that have been set up in London. In fact, they weren't low traffic neighbourhoods, but they kind of like became them. Or in Waltham Forest, actually crime reduced by 10 to 15% in those where you had low traffic areas. Crime actually went down, robbery went down, sexual violence went down. So actually, in terms of not needing a car, and you often feel safer in a car, not needing a car actually reduces crime. So, and that's really interesting. And I suppose the more people who are out using the streets on their bike or walking, the safer you actually are, which is why I live in a city and not in the countryside.
I think that's a really important point, and I think it goes for the bus conversation as well. The more people that use it, the more normalised it is. It becomes something that other people see people like them doing. It's we can get that change to happen and accelerate that. So thank you very much, Gary. I'm going to come to you on a sort of a question around quite specific, but around rail and cycling integration and examples of elsewhere where that's probably being done very well. And are we planning anything that helps make those two modes work better together?
Yeah, it's a good question, and yeah, without trying to deflect the question here, we're not the Transport Authority, we are the Highway Authority, but we work very closely with the Combined Authority, and this issue often crops up. As I think a lot of people on the call will know, we're doing a lot of work on the cycling front. There's still a lot more that we need to do, but we want more and more people to use cycling as a way about getting about, and that needs to connect into bus services and to rail service in some way. And we need to work with the train operators to understand what the issues really are and see if there is a way forward. So I probably don't have a silver bullet to what the answer is to that one, because I know there are some issues there. But I think someone said earlier on today, it's about continuing the conversations, understanding what the constraints are, and seeing if we can come up with a solution with all the interested parties are there. So I probably don't have the answer immediately to hand, Paul, but it is about maybe trying things, trialing them, and perhaps taking a risk sometimes about them failing and giving it a go, and hopefully the wider community will at least see that the organizations are having a go at trying to solve these problems, and may not get it right every time, but at least having a go. So and that's why we want the feedback. And just whilst I've got the floor, one of the questions was around demand responsive transport, and are you trialing that? And how, because that is so important for certain members of our society. Absolutely agree. Many places have tried it across the country. I know of a few of previous places I've worked and they failed because ultimately through lack of use. Well, we've got a scheme that's going to come on stream in the near future, working with the Combined Authority. Let's see if that works. There's a lot of interest in it because if we can make it work here, there'll be others wanting to roll it out in their patch. So for me, it's about, okay, let's take the issue away. Let's see what the possible options are, give it a go, learn from the lessons if it doesn't quite work, and move on. But let's, if I may say so, let's not all be hung out to dry if it doesn't quite go right, because we have to have a trial and error sometimes.
Yeah. Can I just come in? I mean, I think you're absolutely right, Gary. And you know, I think sometimes, and I speak as an ex-politician here, it's quite hard to take the flack when you introduce something that maybe people don't like or don't approve of. I'm thinking about the experience over the last few months with things like the low traffic neighbourhoods and active travel neighbourhoods, that sort of thing, where, you know, these were and are trials which may or may not become permanent. But I think, you know, we have to take a bit of a gamble and take a bit of a risk in trying things out. And then if things are successful, we make them permanent and roll them out elsewhere. Because I think, going back to the point I think I made earlier on, you know, our feeling is that, you know, we haven't got a long time if we're to get close to the zero carbon target in 2030. And part of that must be about trying things sooner rather than later, being prepared for them not to work, but for the things that do work, then really piling in and reproducing them elsewhere in the city.
Yeah, thank you. And I think I was just going to add to that, you know, the sort of the demand responsive transport starts to solve those questions that people are asking about the movements around the city, not just to and from the city centre. They also, you know, it's a really good model to work in smaller towns like Wetherby, Otley, where you can bring people into a central hub where they can then connect to express services or to rail services. And I think just to help Gary out on the rail cycle question, we've got a couple of examples where we're developing a 700 space cycle parking hub at Leeds Station. We're also doing a couple of schemes, one linking New Pudsey to Pudsey itself in terms of improving the routes to there. And also in Rothwell as well. So there's those sorts of links that we're looking to develop, those networks into key hubs where there will be high frequency transport, public transport for people to use. So I think that's really good. Thank you. I think Martin, I was going to ask you a little bit of a question. There's a sort of a theme in here around, it's probably, you know, should we be focusing on how we change the services that run on the network, or should we be looking at what we build and change the highway infrastructure? And I think obviously we do a balance of those two, but how do we get the best bang for our buck, if you like, in terms of what we would use, any potential funding that comes in for?
I think it probably is a combination of both, to be fair. I think in terms of, for example, putting in bus lanes and really making bus services faster, more efficient. That I think is a good use of money, and it's something that can be done relatively quickly, I think. So I think there are certain infrastructural things that we probably should prioritise. As far as this strategy goes, it all comes back to what can be done over a 8 or 9 year period, and the best combination of sort of hard infrastructure and other measures to get there. So I think it's a combination of different things, and of course this all depends on where the money comes from and the funding sources that are available and what they can be used for as well. Which is why I think making the decision at an early stage that actually looking at revenue raising options for money that could be used on anything in relation to this strategy is so important, because it gives the council the flexibility to roll out demand-led transport solutions, for example, much more easy than might be the case if it's a pilot which has funding just for a pilot. So I think it is a combination of the two, and I think some things can be done. It's about what you can achieve over the period of time, combining different things.
Thank you. Okay, I'm just looking through the questions, and there's probably one for maybe a political level for you, Councillor Hayden, around the election of a West Yorkshire mayor and how that might change things, and maybe after that Gary could give a little bit of detail on how we work with the combined authority in terms of their strategies, our strategies, and sort of shared delivery of projects. So Councillor Hayden, in terms of a mayoral authority, how's that going to work?
Well, I'm hoping it is going to work, but it's really exciting opportunity actually, and we've wanted devolution for a long time, and watched other areas kind of benefit from that devolution. We need to have that kind of power, that it's not, the rug's not pulled from under us by central government, we will have a West Yorkshire mayor on the 7th of May, and they do have transport and in part of their remit. So and we have to work with the mayor to get a holistic view across West Yorkshire, because people don't stop at the border of, you mentioned the 36 bus goes to Harrogate, actually that's not even in West Yorkshire. So transport doesn't stop at the boundaries of a city, or at Wakefield or Bradford or Leeds or anywhere. It carries on, and we need that whole kind of area approach, because lots of people work in Leeds and live elsewhere, or vice versa. So we need to encourage all of them to have that connectivity and be able to go and see family in other parts of West Yorkshire or indeed North Yorkshire, and not have to use a car or rely on that.
Paul, I mean, just very briefly on the relationship between the combined authority. Of course, there is a mismatch, isn't there, in terms of targets for different things. So the bus patronage targets are different for the city of Leeds versus West Yorkshire. The zero carbon target is different for Wyker and Leeds. So I think and there are good reasons for that. Obviously, there are good reasons for that. But I think the opportunity that an elected mayor brings is that you've got one person who is the figurehead for that organisation, the figurehead for West Yorkshire. And hopefully something that person can do is to start to resolve some of these issues where there maybe is a difference in approach. As I say, sometimes you will have different targets for the two areas because they're different places. But it does seem strange that we have a different carbon target, for example, in West Yorkshire and in Leeds.
Paul, I think you were asking me a question about sort of the working relationship with Wyker.
Yeah.
So, yeah, we work very closely with colleagues at the Combined Authority, and without getting into too much technical jargon, they are the Transport Authority, we are the Highway Authority, so there is a difference there. But certainly in my time, we've worked very closely. And I think together we've delivered many projects. Clearly, Leeds, because of the size of the city and its importance, we do develop our own transport strategy. The Transport Authority, the Combined Authority, is required by statute to provide and produce a transport strategy. So there is a slight difference there, and sometimes it does look a bit confusing. And as I think one of the questions today is about, well, what's these webinars that are appearing by WICA in the next week or so? And it might appear a bit disjointed, but yeah, it's a result of the sort of the strategies that each authority is required to produce, and the timing sometimes may not be perfect, but there is a considerable amount of joint working, sharing of views and approaches. And I would say this, wouldn't I? But in response to the pandemic, we've developed these webinars, and from my perspective, these have been very positive, and thanks to colleagues like Finn and Paul for putting these on with Nigel Foster. And colleagues have seen that in the Combined Authority and are replicating it and building on it. So I think that's all positive. And if it helps across the piece and to a wider audience to get the scale of the challenges that we all face across, I think that's helpful. And we continue a debate amongst ourselves about what we're going to do, because all these major ambitions here can't come, as I said earlier, it can't come from one or two individuals, if you like, in an ivory tower, if I use that phrase. Everybody needs to own it, see that it's a reasonable approach, it's a balanced approach, and that they can sign up to it. And hopefully we can work together to convince government to give the funding that's going to be needed to deliver it. And that's still probably the major challenge that we, as a city, the Combined Authority have got, and the Mayor will have when he or she comes in May. So I hope that answered your question, Paul.
Yeah, I think it does. Okay, so I am conscious of time, and I'm going to just sort of give the panelists one more opportunity, one question to sort of set out what's the one thing that we're doing, or this strategy entails, that's going to take us in the most positive direction we need to go for Leeds. So I think I want to sort of end it on a positive note of this is how we're going forward. We've got these things that we're doing, and it's going to really change the way we are. And I think maybe I'll start with Martin, because he's obviously had that strategy set out. So he can give us his pitch for what we should be doing first, and then I'll come to Gary and then Councillor Hayden.
We did an exercise last year looking at a part of Leeds, sort of around Marsh Lane, Quarry Hill, where it's currently dominated by road space. It's very hard to navigate as a pedestrian. And we looked at the journey from the Palace Pub to Saxton Gardens, the flats, and it's something like 22 separate lanes of traffic you have to cross for what is effectively a 5-10 minute walk. I think if this strategy is successful, we will have environments where people are able to walk around without having to cross lots of roads of traffic, where there is less traffic anyway, and the traffic that there is cycling, high quality bus lanes, and that people aren't breathing in lots of pollution. So that area is an example, just one example that you could replicate right across the city. How we use the road space and how we reallocate the road space is absolutely key from my point of view.
That's really good, Martin, and it is something that's within our gift as the Highway Authority to look at those sorts of measures as well. So yes, very, very useful point. Thank you. Gary?
In my career, I've read and been party to quite a lot of transport strategies that have been drafted. I think what's different and positive this time, it feels like the timing is right and the ambition is right in this document. There's a level of variety, innovation, and also I think the timing feels right, that we've been able to, over the last 12 months, actually implement some innovative, different schemes on the ground in the city, and whether it be the low traffic neighbourhoods, the improvements that hopefully people will see when they come back to the city in terms of what we're doing outside the Corn Exchange, Infirmary Street, Park Row and the Head Row, that people see these changes that we're making it a better place for people to go about their business, in a nice, pleasant environment, but be able to use it for cycling, walking, and the public transport, as well as the car if need be. I just think people will see that this is the place that we want to live and work in, and let's get on the back of this and let's push forward and continue to make the changes. Leeds has changed many times over the years. It's changed in the last 12 months. It's going to change again, and hopefully the community, everybody involved can get behind this strategy, which has been well received to date. And I've received some very positive comments from external partners to this, and it does feel a very positive moment in time, and I just hope that we can find the funding to deliver it in quite a short space of time, as Martin has said.
Thank you, Gary. Okay, Councillor Hayden, I'm going to give the last word to you on this series of webinars. So no pressure.
Thank you very much. I was just thinking, reflecting on listening to both Martin and Gary there, reflecting on that within my lifetime, we've gone from the car of the city of the motorway, and through to now, really looking at that. Yes, I love driving. I love my car. Well, but not that I own one, but I love driving. But we need now, and I think there's real excitement about putting people first, putting pedestrians first, making cities for people to really enjoy, and to like Gary said about that really lovely environment. The Con Exchange is a beautiful building that you can't really see and enjoy and experience because it's surrounded by roads and traffic, and it's going to be really exciting. Instead of the car coming first, that we put people first, and all the health benefits and just mood benefits, mental health benefits, and benefits of business, and just the way we live our lives. I think it's a really exciting time, and the time is right. And I think the pandemic has really shown us that we can make big changes very, very quickly. It's not easy, but it is doable. Thank you.
Thank you. I think that's a great point to end this on. So I'll just thank all the panelists again for their contributions, and everyone else that's been involved in the webinars that we've gone through. A special mention to Finn, my colleague who's doing the slides, has done all the organisations, been absolute star in delivering these. So big thank you to Finn as well. Please do, as I've said before, engage in this consultation. Tell us what you think, because this strategy needs to be for you. So thank you all very much. We'll finish it there. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.